Many walk through life believing they've already found themselves. They carry a name in their pocket, a profession that defines them, and a list of tastes that fill the forms of their soul. They say, "I am this," like someone planting a flag over unknown territory. However, what they call their identity is nothing more than the polished reflection of what they learned to be. It's not their true face, but the mask that best fit the world. Beneath that face, there's something nameless, something that doesn't respond to labels, timetables, or biographies. Something ancient, something that was there long before you could spell your name. It lives in the silence you feel just before sleep, in the unfounded nostalgia, in the joy you can't explain. And when you close your eyes, that something tries to speak to you. It doesn't do it with words. It doesn't do it with logic. It speaks to you like the wind through the trees or the fire dancing in the night, with symbols, with images that seem absurd, but contain a wisdom that defies the rules of this world. Dreams, meaningless stories that slip through the crack of the unconscious. Endless falls, wingless flights, chases down blind alleys, rooms you've never seen, voices you don't recognize, but that seem to know you better than you know yourself. These aren't accidents. They're signs. They're letters your soul has written in invisible ink, waiting for you to finally learn to read them. Because your conscious mind, the one that organizes the day, that calculates and compares, has forgotten many things. It has buried truths under layers of duties and fears. But the soul does not forget. It stores every unshed tear, every interrupted laugh, every broken promise that still hurts without you knowing why. And when you sleep, it opens its secret archives and shows them to you with metaphors. Imagine, for example, that you dream of a house. You walk through it as if it were yours, and suddenly you discover a door. Behind it, an old room, full of dust and forgotten objects. It's not a simple dream, it's a calling. That room is you, a part that was trapped in time, waiting to be recognized. Perhaps a denied talent, perhaps a denied pain, but yours, nonetheless. The water you see in your dreams may be the emotion you haven't expressed. The fire may be the transformation you fear. The animal watching you may be your instinct, which you've been ignoring for so long. The staircase you climb or descend may be a metaphor for your inner journey, your ascent toward consciousness or your descent toward the soul. These symbols don't have a single meaning. They change with each heart. There's no dictionary to translate the soul. You have to feel it. You have to dare to close your eyes and look within. The Swiss scholar who explored these invisible worlds, that gardener of symbols named Carl Jung, understood that human beings carry a hidden map within, a map that isn't taught in schools, but that guides the soul's steps. He called that map the unconscious, and he defended it as a treasure, not a dangerous shadow. It's not a dark corner filled with ghosts, but a secret library where the truth you've forgotten about yourself resides. Jung wrote his final message in a book intended not for scholars, but for seekers. Man and his symbols. A beacon for those who feel something is missing, even though nothing is missing. For those who are successful, yet feel empty. For those who don't understand their tears or their laughter. That book was a key, an invitation to return home. And the modern world has convinced us to distrust the soul. It tells us that imagination is childish, that emotion is weakness, that daydreaming is a waste of time. It has taught us to live from the mind, not the heart, to plan everything and feel little, to live on the surface and forget the depths. That's why so many live like shadows of themselves. They walk straight, but they are lost. They are celebrated for what they do, but forgotten for who they are. They have conquered external mountains, but never descended into their own abysses. And yet, something inside them keeps calling. A symbol that repeats itself in their dreams. A story that crosses their minds 1,000 times. A number, an animal, a gesture. The soul, when it's not heard, insists. It knocks gently, again and again. And if you don't listen to it, it withers. But if one day you decide to listen, everything changes. If you stop running away from your symbols, and start walking with them, something awakens. Life ceases to be a reaction and becomes creation. You no longer seek meaning in external things because you have discovered a universe within. Jung called that journey the path to wholeness. Not to perfection, but to integration. It's about becoming whole again, not a fragment. About accepting both light and shadow. About embracing the inner child, the sage, the warrior, the lover. They all live inside you, waiting their turn to speak. And the language they use is not that of reason, it's that of the soul. So the next time you dream, don't just wake up and follow the same old script. Ask, listen, observe. Every dream is a message, every symbol, a mirror, and those invisible mirrors hold the truest reflection you'll ever see. Who you are when no one is looking, not even yourself. Because deep inside, beyond names and masks, lies your essence. And that essence, even if you have forgotten its voice, has never stopped searching for you. 1. If you have made it this far, it's clear this topic resonates with you. Remember, the first link in the description has more metaphysical content that can take you even further. The voice that whispers in dreams. There are messages that arrive without shocks, without bells or letters, without noise. They arrive in the stillness of the night, when the world sleeps and the soul at last dares to speak. They don't use words because words are structures of the ego. They don't follow logic because logic is a wall when it comes to truth. They come wrapped in images that burn without fire, in sensations that have no name, in impossible scenes that, nevertheless, feel more real than everyday life. The scholar, Carl Gustav Jung, called this way of speaking the language of dreams. And although many ignore it or dismiss it as fantasy, he knew for certain dreams are more truthful than the waking mind, because they don't tell you what you want to hear. They tell you what you need to know. The first chapters of his most intimate work don't offer easy answers. They offer a mirror, but not one that flatters, but one that reveals. They return the gaze of what you have avoided. And if you have the courage to look without running away, you will not find darkness, but depth. You will not face the monster, but the message. Jung maintained that every dream is a letter written by your unconscious, not to be solved like a riddle, but to be felt like a wound is touched, with truth. Most people dismiss their dreams as meaningless images, like internal storms that dissolve upon awakening. But the unconscious doesn't improvise. It repeats. It repeats because it wants to be heard. Imagine a man who dreams, night after night, of walking down a narrow hallway. There are no doors, no windows, only footsteps leading nowhere. During the day, he smiles at meetings, fulfills his obligations, shares meals with his family. But something inside him feels stopped, stuck. That hallway isn't literal. It's his emotional life. It's his encapsulated routine. It's his soul crying out for space to breathe. Jung would have asked, what are you avoiding feeling? What part of yourself have you locked behind all those doors that no longer open? The symbol doesn't need to be explained. It needs to be contemplated. The hallway is a call. And like every symbol, if it's not heeded, it intensifies. The dream persists, darkens, and becomes a clamor. This is what happens when we deny the signs. First, they come as whispers, then as screams. And if we don't heed them, they transform into anxiety, into unfounded sadness, into that feeling of emptiness that not even success can fill. The unconscious doesn't seek punishment. It seeks balance. It doesn't want fear. It wants awakening. Jung said that ignoring dreams is rejecting the purest guidance life offers us. The dream is that wise, frustrated friend who repeats the same thing over and over again until you listen. What are you trying to tell me? Is the question that changes the course. Not what does this mean, but what part of me is speaking through this image? A woman dreamed she was drowning in a dark sea. At first, she thought it was stress, but through internal dialogue and later with professional help, she realized she wasn't drowning in water, but in a relationship that had dried up her voice, her will, her essence. She couldn't get angry. She couldn't choose. She lived within someone else's mold. And the sea wasn't an enemy, it was the mirror of her repressed emotion. As she accepted that truth, her dreams changed. The raging sea became a lake, then a river. One day, she dreamed she was walking barefoot along a calm shore, not because her unconscious had changed, but because she had learned to listen to it. This is how the symbol works. It's not static. It evolves with you. It's not a universal hieroglyph, it's your story, your truth in image form. Jung warned, don't try to decipher a symbol as if it were a code. Feel the symbol, draw your dream, write it down, return to it as one returns to a temple. Another patient dreamed of a snake. At first, he feared it, but over time, he understood. The snake wasn't coming to bite him, it was coming to transform him. Because in ancient myths, the snake sheds its skin, it dies and is reborn. It holds the secret of renewal. And so, what at first seemed like a threat became a guide. The conscious classifies, good or bad, success or failure. The unconscious embraces mystery. It knows that fire burns, but it also purifies. That the monster can protect the treasure. That darkness isn't always the end. Sometimes it's the womb where something new is born. That's why Jung encouraged us to observe, not solve. To feel, not rationalize. What scares you most in a dream may be exactly what you need to recover. The inner child, the denied desire, the silenced rage, the sadness hidden behind an automatic smile. Many of us were raised to hide pain, to keep quiet when something burns inside, to hide fear with a laugh. But emotions don't die from being repressed. They simply descend into the basement of the soul, and from there, they continue to speak to us. They dress up as symbols. They sneak into the night. They become images that shake us, not to scare us, but to wake us up. The unconscious seeks balance. If you're too rational, it will send you emotion. If you're overly controlling, it will send you chaos. If you ignore your desires, it will send you fantasies. If you fear your shadow, you'll dream of someone chasing you. Not to punish you, but to remind you. The other half is you too. That's the essence of man and his symbols. You're not meant to live in extremes. You are not just mind. You're not just instinct. You're a bridge, a dance between day and night, between the self that shows itself and the self that hides. Listen to your dreams, not as if you were looking for an explanation, but as if you were listening to music with an open heart. Because hidden in every symbol is a part of you that still wants to be loved. The hidden faces that inhabit your soul. There is an invisible bridge that connects your external world with the secret universe that dwells within you. That bridge is not made of words or certainties, but of symbols. Images that appear when you close your eyes, emotions that emerge for no apparent reason, figures that cross the corridors of your dreams like ancient messengers who have traveled from the confines of your unconscious. How do you begin to decipher this forgotten language? The sage of the soul, Carl Gustav Jung, offered a simple yet profound guide. Write down your dreams. Don't judge them. Don't try to understand them immediately. Just gather them like someone who gathers seeds without yet knowing which flower will bloom from each one. Write them down upon waking, even if they seem absurd, even if they evaporate as you take your first conscious breath. Over time, you'll see how certain images repeat themselves, how similar emotions resonate in different settings. Then, without realizing it, you'll have begun to understand the language of your soul. It's not about searching for the correct meaning, as if there were a sacred dictionary with universal answers. It's about asking yourself, what do I feel when I see this symbol? What part of my life does it remind me of? What emotion, forgotten or denied, does it awaken in me? Symbols don't lie. They don't know how. They only speak a language that the modern world has silenced with haste, with logic, with distractions. Jung believed that by rediscovering this language, life becomes more authentic. It becomes less automatic, less repetitive. Because you stop living on autopilot and begin to walk with awareness. You no longer fear change because you understand that every strange image, every disturbing dream has not come to confuse you but to guide you. Within every human being, Jung said, lives a constellation of ancient patterns, psychic imprints older than your name, deeper than your memory. He called these patterns archetypes. They are not fairy tale characters or personality traits, but emotional structures that appear again and again in your dreams, in your inner stories, in your inexplicable reactions. Why have so many cultures told the same stories, in different guises? The young man who leaves home faces a beast and returns transformed. The wise old man who gives advice at just the right moment. The dark figure in the forest who seduces or threatens. The caring mother, the laughing child, the jester who flouts logic, the lover, the king, the shadow. They're not just myths, they're parts of you. Jung explained that these archetypes are not invented by the individual. They are inherited. They live in the collective unconscious, an invisible field where all human souls are connected. Archetypes emerge in dreams, in religions, in stories that span oceans and centuries, because they are part of what it means to be human. When a child looks up to a teacher with admiration, they are seeing the archetype of the wise old man. When you feel your intuition guiding you, perhaps it is the wise man within you who takes your hand. When someone breaks your trust and hurts you in an ancestral way, the shadow has manifested. The shadow, that archetype we fear so much and need so much. It's the part of you you've denied. What you repress, what you hide, what you're afraid to look at. In dreams, it can take the form of a stranger chasing you, a monster you don't recognize, a distorted reflection. But it hasn't come to harm you. It has come to remind you of what you've forgotten about yourself. The shadow is not evil. It's a mirror. Jung wrote, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. It's not about avoiding the uncomfortable, but embracing it, because only by facing the shadow can one achieve wholeness. Therein lies your silenced rage, your repressed desire, your unresolved fears. Confronting it is the first step toward your whole soul. Often, that shadow appears in your dreams as a version of yourself you don't want to see. A cruel man, a ruthless woman, a face that resembles yours but makes you uncomfortable. They're not enemies. They're you, demanding space. And then there are the more subtle and enigmatic archetypes, the anima and the animus. The inner energies of the opposite. Within man lives the anima, his sensitive, receptive, emotional part. Within woman lives the animus, her strength, her logic, her will. They have nothing to do with social roles, but with psychic balance. When one of these sides is denied, the soul fractures. A man taught never to cry can freeze his heart. A woman forced to smile even when she's burning inside can lose the power of her voice. And then, the unconscious intervenes. Dreams bring compensation. A mysterious female figure guiding, a towering man blocking the path. It's not others, it's you. These figures don't appear to seduce or frighten you. They appear to show you what's missing, what has been exiled within you. Because the soul, when incomplete, seeks a way to remind you of what still lives within you. So, when you dream, don't just wake up. Don't extinguish that flame. Write, draw, feel, and above all, listen. Because inside you is a hero waiting for his journey. A wise man waiting for you to trust his voice. A shadow waiting for you to embrace it. A dormant energy waiting to be acknowledged. And every night, as the world falls silent, they return to you. Not to confuse you, but to help you remember who you always were, even before you knew what to call yourself. The invisible map that lives within you. You didn't come to this world to be perfect. You came to be true. Not to reach a summit without mistakes, but to walk the secret paths of your soul until you discover that every wound, every shadow, every contradiction has its place on the journey toward your complete being. What Carl Gustav Jung called individuation. The art of becoming whole. It's not about eliminating your flaws, but about embracing them as essential parts of your story. Not about conquering the ego, but about harmonizing it with the soul. And on that path, archetypes are not obstacles, but signposts in the salt in the forest. They show you what you haven't yet seen. They reveal what you've swept under the rug of habit. In this modern age, full of speed, logic, and performance, we have learned to live from the surface. We build routines, wear social masks, and master the language of efficiency. But in the attempt to be consistent, we forget to be whole. We leave behind the child who laughs without permission, the wise man who speaks in silence, the lover who touches the world with tenderness, the dark side that holds untapped power. And so, we become flat. We feel anxious. We lose our way, not because something is broken, but because something is forgotten. Have you ever been overcome by a disproportionate emotion? A minimal criticism ignites you like a dry fire. An unanswered silence throws you into an abyss of insecurity. It's not the fact. It's the echo. It's an ancient part of you still waiting to be acknowledged. An activated archetype. A wound that still breathes. A story that hasn't been healed. Jung, in his work Man and His Symbols, shared dreams that were not absurd but mirrors. A man dreamed he was being judged by a tribunal of animals. It seemed ridiculous to him, until he realized he had stifled his instincts for years. His life was an altar to reason, but his body, his wild soul, demanded a voice. The trial was his spirit demanding balance. A woman dreamed of a crumbling cathedral. At first, she thought it was just a meaningless image, but upon further investigation, she discovered the truth. In her pursuit of external achievements, she had left her spiritual center behind. Her neglected inner temple was crying out for reconstruction. The dream didn't threaten her, it called to her. This is how archetypes act. They don't impose. They invite, they don't shout. They whisper with images. They don't force you to come. They wait for you. They are in your dreams, in your sudden tears, in your creative blocks, in your emotional reactions. And when you stop, just for a moment, and listen to them, the veil begins to fall. You discover that you are never alone, that there are inner voices that have been patiently speaking to you for a long time. Those figures that appear in your life aren't coincidences. They are reflections of your psyche. The inner mother who cares for you when the world hurts you. The inner hero who wants to take risks even when he trembles. The shadow that contains your pent-up fire. The child who just wants to play when everything gets too serious. Every relationship you have activates one of these parts. Every intense emotion is a door. Every creative impulse is an archetype trying to break out of silence. The big mistake is ignoring them. Jung warned, when you reject one of these archetypes, it doesn't disappear. It retreats and hides. And from that corner, it begins to act on your behalf. It sabotages decisions, disguises itself as anxiety, breaks relationships, imprisons your joy. It doesn't do it out of malice. It does it because you stop listening to it. When an archetype is ignored, it doesn't disappear. It becomes destiny. But if you choose to look at it with sincere eyes, if you choose to feel its presence instead of controlling it, magic happens. The symbol reveals its wisdom. The emotion reveals its root. The image reveals its message. Then judgment becomes self-knowledge. The fallen cathedral becomes a renewed temple. The monster of your dreams hands you a key. The shadow becomes an ally. Life ceases to be a series of automatic reactions and transforms into a symbolic dance. You become a conscious walker of the inner landscape. You no longer run away from pain. You recognize it as a teacher. You no longer fear your contradictions. You integrate them with compassion. And it is at that moment, when the symbol becomes an internal word, when the dream becomes understanding, that your existence begins to flow with profound meaning. Because then you are no longer chasing an idea of perfection imposed from outside. You are following the golden thread that connects all your parts. And every part, even the one you deny, has something sacred to teach you. the return to inner integrity. An uncomfortable truth silently permeates the lives of many human beings. When you ignore a part of yourself, that part doesn't disappear. It doesn't fade away or surrender. What it does is remain crouched, patient, waiting for a crack in the routine, a glimmer of awareness, a moment of vulnerability. And if the forgetting persists, if the denial becomes chronic, then that forgotten part takes control without warning. It no longer operates from the shadows. It operates from the helm. The inner child, silenced by a demanding childhood, a rigid upbringing, or the fear of not fitting in, doesn't die. It just changes shape. It becomes an overly serious adult, obsessed with the control, incapable of enjoying the simple things, deeply disconnected from the lightness of life. This adult may meet all external expectations, but internally feels tired for no apparent reason. Joy doesn't move them. Spontaneity seems threatening, and tears are seen as an intolerable weakness. The shadow, on the other hand, that dark region of the psyche that contains everything we have rejected, everything we are ashamed of, everything society disapproves of, doesn't vanish when it's repressed either. It becomes a silent judge. It manifests itself in constant comparisons, in envy disguised as irony, in relentless judgments of others that are actually judgments directed at oneself. When we deny the shadow, we don't avoid it. We unconsciously release it. And then it expresses itself through resentment, self-sabotage, jealousy, or wounded pride. However, when we begin to recognize these inner figures, the child, the shadow, the sage, the lover, the creator, the hero who hesitates before crossing the threshold, and begin to consciously engage with them, a new possibility emerges: healing. This healing comes not through judgment or rejection, but through deep attention. Listening to these inner voices is an act of radical compassion. It means allowing them to speak, perhaps for the first time, without fear of being silenced. Carl Jung never proposed mastering archetypes or subjecting symbols to cold analysis. His invitation was different: to learn to live with them, to listen to them, understand them, give them space to express themselves in safe and conscious ways. Art, writing, silent reflection, free body movement, even an honest conversation with oneself in front of a mirror or in a diary, all are paths for the exiled parts of the soul to return home. Working with symbols is not an intellectual process. It is a process of inner communion, and it all starts in unexpected places. A disturbing dream, an exaggerated emotional reaction, a sadness that has no apparent cause, a recurring image that settles in the mind like a melody you can't forget. The key is not to rush to the question, "What's wrong with me?" but to shift the question to something wiser. What part of me is trying to be acknowledged? From that moment on, one begins to walk a different path. It's no longer about escaping discomfort or numbing the emptiness with external noise, but about turning one's gaze inward and discovering that the human soul is not a rigid, simple unity, but a constellation of voices, energies, and inner presences waiting to be integrated. One is not just oneself, one is many. It is a living symbolic system, an emotional ecosystem. A temple with infinite rooms, and each room has a story to tell, a wound to heal, a truth to reveal. That's why Jung asserted that symbols don't belong solely to the world of dreams or ancient tales. They are not relics of past cultures or mere fantasies of the dormant imagination. Symbols are alive, embedded in everyday life. They are present in the simplest gestures, in the most common objects, in events that one considers trivial, but that, when observed closely, reveal a deep emotional and symbolic charge. They are the signals the soul uses to remind us who we are, what we need, where we are going. A simple wedding ring, for example, is not just a piece of metal. It holds generations of meaning, commitment, unity, loyalty, promise, eternity. A flag is not just a piece of cloth dyed with colors. It holds collective emotions, stories of belonging, national wounds, shared nostalgia, a tattoo on the skin, a repeated melody, a word whispered in a moment of anguish, a door that won't open, or a dress of a certain color. All of these elements can have an unconscious symbolic weight. They touch on chords that we often don't understand with reason, but that stir something deep within us. The symbol is the link between the object and the soul. It is the way the invisible speaks through the visible. And the more we develop our ability to perceive them, the more inner freedom we gain. Because then we stop being driven by impulses we don't understand, and we begin to walk with intention. We are no longer victims of what we feel, nor slaves to what we don't understand. We become conscious participants in our own transformation. Jung said that the greatest journey in a human being's life is not the one that leads them to external success, nor to social approval, nor even to material security. The true journey is the one that leads them back to themselves, not to the image constructed by the ego, but to the deeper being that exists beyond the name, the role, the personal history. This return is not achieved overnight, nor is it achieved with formulas. It is a long process, full of mirrors, silences, and questions that have no immediate answers. But it is, without a doubt, the only path worth taking. Because when you begin to live this way, connected to your symbols, attentive to your emotions, willing to listen to what moves within you, everything around you begins to take on a different meaning. You no longer look for meaning outside. You discover it in the details. You no longer need external approval. The inner truth is enough. You no longer walk by inertia. You walk by choice. And suddenly you realize that your soul never left you. It was just waiting for you to remember the way back. The journey towards yourself. The deepest purpose of human existence is not momentary happiness or unattainable perfection. The true purpose, the one that silently burns beneath every decision, every emotion, every crisis, is integrity. Not the kind measured by moral virtue, but the kind that comes when one reconnects with oneself, whole, with all one's parts. Being whole means accepting the totality of who you are. Not just your accomplishments, your social smile, or your most functional self, but also the parts you hide, the parts you fear, the parts that have been relegated to the basement of your consciousness. Being whole means embracing both calm and chaos, both love and fear, both light and shadow. It requires courage to look within and not look away. Carl Jung called this process individuation, but he didn't present it as a point of arrival, but rather as a never-ending journey. Individuation is the art of becoming one with oneself, of weaving the scattered parts of the soul into a conscious and living whole. It is a slow, intimate, and often solitary path. It is the journey of the human being who tires of living in borrowed roles and yearns to return to their true essence, the one that lies beyond masks, beyond duty, and the desire to please. This journey doesn't begin with certainties. It begins with a feeling of unease, a barely perceptible tension, like a string that no longer vibrates to the same tune, a feeling of estrangement from one's own life. Everything seems to be in order. Work continues, routines are fulfilled, relationships are sustained, and yet something deep down murmurs, this doesn't fit anymore. Maybe it's a career that once fulfilled you, but is now slowly draining you. Maybe it's a relationship that, though seemingly stable, has become superficial. Maybe it's success itself, so sought after, so celebrated, that now feels hollow. These moments of discomfort aren't mistakes. They're messages from your soul, signs that your deeper self is asking to be released, that life is inviting you to leave a phase behind and move toward a more honest way of being. At the center of individuation is not the ego. The ego is important, yes, but it's only one part. It can't guide the entire journey. The true core is what Jung called the self, a totality that includes both the conscious and the unconscious, both the lived and the potential. It's that part of you that knows, that silently watches, that dreams while you sleep. This self doesn't usually present itself as a clear thought. It often manifests itself in symbols: a circle, a wise figure, a divine image, a mandala in a dream. It's not a character, it's a presence, a silent center. When you ignore this presence, life becomes blurry, directionless. But when you begin to listen to it, to follow its signs, everything begins to take on meaning. The journey toward wholeness often begins with an inevitable encounter, the encounter with the shadow, that part of you that contains everything you've repressed, denied, feared, or judged. It's made up of unexpressed rages, disguised fears, and hidden shame. Most people spend their lives running from the shadow, projecting it onto others, denying its existence. But Jung taught that true healing begins when we stop running and decide to face it head-on. Facing the shadow doesn't mean acting without a filter or justifying destructive impulses. It means something much more mature. Recognizing that we have divided our being, that we have said, "This is me," and "This is not me," creating an internal abyss. The shadow operates in the darkness precisely because we don't give it a place in the light. The more we ignore it, the more influence it has over us. But the moment we bring it into consciousness, its power diminishes, and the process of integration begins. Integration isn't just an internal act. It must translate into daily life. If you've lived for years pleasing others, the first act of integration might be learning to say no without guilt. If you've buried your creativity for fear of judgment, integrating yourself might involve returning to painting, writing, or creating without justification. If you've repressed your emotions, integrating means allowing yourself to cry, express, and feel without censorship. This path isn't about making you a different person. It's not about leaving behind who you were to invent a new identity. Rather, it's about reclaiming what was always there, waiting to be acknowledged. The parts of you you thought were wrong or useless aren't mistakes. They're missing pieces of your wholeness. And as you reunite them, your inner world stabilizes. You no longer react with fear. You no longer depend on constant approval. You no longer search for meaning in empty places. You begin to inhabit yourself. Individuation, then, is a return, a sacred return to the home of the soul. It is neither linear nor predictable. Sometimes moving forward means stopping. Sometimes growing means letting go. But each conscious step brings you closer to that center where, finally, you are you, without needing to justify yourself. Jung understood this clearly. Those who do not listen to the soul's signals end up being dominated by them. But those who accept the call of the symbol, who allow themselves to be guided by dreams and authentic emotions, discover something beyond the rational. They discover the profound experience of being truly alive. The encounter with the forgotten reflection. There is no deeper journey than that which leads us to the totality of our being. I'm not talking about the pursuit of momentary pleasure or the artificial idea of perfection we were taught to pursue, but rather about that silent and winding path that leads the soul toward its integrity. Being whole doesn't mean being impeccable, but rather being willing to recognize oneself as whole, accepting both what one loves about oneself and what bothers one, what hurts, what has been denied. To be whole is to embrace love and fear with equal tenderness. It is to honor both order and chaos, shadow as much as light. There is no real evolution without that courageous acceptance. And it is in this mystery of self-completion that the concept Carl Jung called individuation arises. A process, not a goal. A slow, almost vegetal awakening, measured not in visible achievements, but in internal transformations. It is the return to the true self, beyond the persona we have created to survive in the theater of the world. This profound, open-ended journey often begins with a rift, an imperceptible fissure in the routine, an inner dissonance that begins to make itself felt like an echo that cannot be silenced. Something no longer fits. Perhaps it's that job that once offered meaning and now silently drains joy. Perhaps it's It's that relationship that shines brightly in the world but resonates empty in the heart. Perhaps it's the success that, far from satisfying, reveals a deeper thirst. These moments, far from being failures, are invitations from the soul, signs that we are ready to move to another threshold of consciousness. At the center of this journey is not the ego, that carefully constructed image, but the self, a whole that encompasses both what you see and what lies deep within. This self is more than identity. It is origin and destiny. It is the mirror that reflects both your history and your potential. And it often speaks to you through symbols. A silent guide in a dream, a mandala that appears in the closed mind during sleep, a circle that never ends. It is not a character, it is a presence. And the more you ignore it, the more lost your inner compass becomes. But when you begin to listen to it, the world regains its meaning. The gateway to this wholeness often opens through an encounter with the shadow. Hidden there lies everything you were forced to reject. The anger you never expressed, the fears you denied, the emotions you bottled up to be accepted. Many live in flight from that shadow. But true growth begins when you finally decide to turn and look it in the eye. Not to act on its impulses, but to recognize where you split yourself in two, where you declared one part of you worthy and the other not. Once the shadow is accepted, a new threshold opens: integration. And this isn't an abstract task. It's a concrete, daily, human task. If you've always said yes when you wanted to shout no, integration will mean starting to set limits. If you've stifled your creativity for fear of judgment, integration will mean creating without expectations. If you've blocked your emotions to avoid vulnerability, integration will mean crying when your heart needs it, speaking when something hurts, feeling without fear. On this path toward who you are, there is a stage that many ignore: the encounter with the inner opposite. Jung called these anima and animus, symbolic forces that represent the feminine in men and the masculine in women. They are not gender identities, but psychic polarities, complementary energies that inhabit all of us. And when repressed, they generate an imbalance that seeps into every decision, every relationship, every emotion. The anima embodies sensitivity, intuition, devotion, and connection with the invisible. When repressed, emotional hardness, emotional disconnection, and extreme rationality emerge. Men who have learned that men don't cry tend to hide their tenderness in the shadows, and that tenderness, denied, turns into rigidity or emptiness. The animus, in women, represents will, logic, action, and discernment. When it is blocked, insecurity, passivity, and difficulty making decisions based on one's own strength emerge. Women who have been raised to please, to be silent, to yield, often forget that within them also lives a sacred warrior. These two energies are not meant to dominate each other, but to dance together. And when they meet, when they recognize each other, a profound alchemy emerges. The union of the receptive with the active, of intuition with clarity, of care with firmness. These figures often appear in dreams: a mysterious man blocking the path, an enigmatic woman leading the way into a forest. They are not alien characters. They are fragments of you, longing to be reintegrated. True wisdom, Jung would say, lies not in repressing what we are, but in dialoguing with it. And the soul has its own languages to call to us: symbols, dreams, intense emotions that seem inexplicable. If you learn to decipher those calls, if you stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What part of me wants to be seen?" then you will be walking toward yourself. The path to wholeness is not a straight line. It's rather a sacred spiral. It doesn't transform you into someone new. It returns you to who you always were, before the fear, before the conditioning, before the forgetting. At every step of this journey, you are not alone. You are accompanied by your shadow, your light, your inner opposite. And above all, You are accompanied by your soul, which has always known where you should return. Madness or enlightenment, the unexpected threshold of inner transformation. There are moments in life when everything falls apart. The mind, which once seemed clear and orderly, begins to flood with images, strange dreams, and emotions that don't fit into everyday logic. What was once certain becomes uncertainty. What once had form turns into fog. In those moments, many people believe they are losing their minds. But Carl Jung, with the wisdom of one who has traveled through the depths of the soul, offered us another perspective. Perhaps you are not going crazy, perhaps you are awakening. In 1913, following his break with Freud, Jung began to experience visions so vivid, they pushed him to the limits of comprehension. Symbolic dreams, intense emotions, archetypal images emerged like uncontrollable waves from the depths of his unconscious. To the world, he looked like a man falling apart. But he didn't run away. He didn't anesthetize his soul or turn his back on his pain. Instead, he sat with it, listened to it, drew it, wrote it down. That inner journey transformed into the Red Book, an intimate and profound testimony of a mind opening toward the sacred, the mysterious, the unknown. And it was in that descent that Jung discovered a truth that the modern world still refuses to accept. Not every collapse is a mistake. Sometimes, when life shatters, when identity dissolves, when we feel we no longer recognize who we are not at the end, but at the true beginning. In his work, Man and His Symbols, Jung explains that the unconscious doesn't always manifest itself smoothly or gradually. Sometimes it erupts like a torrent. It can manifest itself in disturbing dreams, emotional crises, and symbolic visions that a rational language can't decipher. And if we don't have a symbolic map or spiritual guide, this eruption can seem threatening. But in reality, the unconscious doesn't seek to destroy you. It seeks to complete you. When we've ignored, repressed, or fragmented essential parts of ourselves for too long, the psyche is forced to seek other ways to express itself. It does this through the body, insomnia, anxiety, and persistent dreams. And most importantly, it doesn't do this to punish you, but to give you back what you've lost. Every symbol, every intense emotion, every inexplicable image is a piece of your soul asking to come home. The real danger isn't in descending into the depths of oneself. The danger lies in doing so without language, without a container, without support. Jung knew this, and that's why he dedicated his life to teaching people how to engage with their symbols, how to transform chaos into meaning, how to turn collapse into revelation. Set of identities, masks, and habits no longer responds to the inner truth. The soul issues a call. That call may sound like a nervous breakdown or an existential crisis, but it's actually a rite of passage. If at that moment you insist on clinging to the old, if you try to sustain an identity that no longer resonates with your essence, the process becomes unbearable. But if you have the courage to let go, to look within, to let the symbols speak to you, a metamorphosis begins. A more authentic version of you begins to emerge. Imagine someone losing their job. On the outside, it's a financial hardship, but deep down, it can be experienced as a loss of purpose. Dreams are filled with dark forests, crumbling buildings, faceless figures. These are symbolic representations of the ego's collapse. The forest represents the unknown, the building, the crumbling self, the anonymous figure's unfaced fears. But if this person begins to pay attention, if they stop resisting, the dreams change. A light appears, a guide, a secret door. It is the unconscious reaching out a hand, offering a way back to the truth. Jung said, "There is no awareness without pain." And it's true. Becoming who you truly are requires going through the dark night of the soul. It requires facing what you've denied, feeling what you've avoided, listening to what you've kept silent. But on the other side of the abyss, there's no punishment. There's wholeness. Not an idealized version of you, but a complete version. Human, imperfect, whole. It's not about eliminating suffering, but about giving it context, turning it into a teacher instead of an enemy. That's the difference between madness and enlightenment. Not the experience itself, but how you sustain it. If you believe you're broken, if you panic, the descent becomes chaos. But if you ask, what part of me wants to be heard? Then the descent becomes initiation. That's why symbols are so vital. They bridge the gap between emotional chaos and deeper meaning. They allow the inexpressible to take shape. A person grieving may dream of a burning tree. Another person dealing with repressed anger may see lions in their dreams. These images are not accidents. They are the secret language of the soul, trying to heal where words cannot reach. Jung developed a practice called active imagery, a way of consciously interacting with these images. Drawing them, writing them, speaking to them in your mind, not as artistic exercises, but as symbolic rituals. It's an inner dialogue with the forces that live in the unconscious. You can talk to your shadow, draw the mountain that appears every night, write a letter to the animal that haunts you in your dreams. Every such act isn't fantasy, it's alchemy. Madness, when listened to with an open heart, can become wisdom. And enlightenment, when forced without roots, can become escape. What Jung taught us is that the soul doesn't seek perfection, it seeks truth. And truth is symbolic, emotional, contradictory, and luminous, all at the same time. So if one day you feel like your life is falling apart, like your mind is filling with symbols you don't understand, like your heart is on the brink of collapse, remember, you are not falling, you are descending to your source. You are not being punished, you are being reconfigured. And although it may seem like darkness, it may be the prelude to your deepest awakening. The return of the inner alchemist. There comes a time on the spiritual path when contemplation is no longer enough, not because it has lost its value, but because the soul, having crossed its own deserts, yearns to touch the world with new hands. The true journey does not end at the top of the mountain, but when you descend with wisdom gathered between your fingers and a clear gaze to embrace life as it is. Many believe that awakening implies escape. They imagine the seeker as someone who distances himself from the noise, who leaves the cities behind, who encloses himself among symbols and meditates incessantly. But the wise are not those who hide from the world, but those who reconcile themselves with it. The soul that has traversed the night no longer needs to preach its journey. Its transformation is silent, but evident. It no longer acts on impulse or responds out of habit. It walks slowly, with its feet planted firmly on the ground and his heart attentive to the smallest details. The trembling of a leaf, a sincere glance, the echo of a forgotten promise. The work, the street, or the climate hasn't changed. The way we experience it has. Where there was once urgency, now there's presence. Where there was once fear, now there's compassion. Where there was once only demand, now there's room for tenderness. The process of returning to the world isn't a return to routine. It's a new incarnation of being. As if the soul that had lain dormant for so long finally dared to open its eyes amidst the daily hustle and bustle. And then, the old ghosts no longer frighten. They are recognized as the lost parts of the soul. The emotions that once tore at us are now allies, proclaiming a profound message. Decisions are made not to please, but to honor. The goal is no longer to fit in, but to express with integrity the inner melody that each person has come to sing. What was once feared is now respected. Criticism no longer defines. Loneliness no longer devours. Uncertainty no longer paralyzes. Because within, an anchor has been born, a living root that doesn't need the world to be perfect to flourish. That root is the truth of the soul. In ancient tales, The hero who returns from his odyssey never returns empty-handed. He brings with him a sacred fire, a knowledge that cannot be taught in words, but that burns in his gaze. In real life, that torch can take many forms. The courage to say enough, the tenderness of an unashamed tear, the audacity to renounce that which does not nourish. Sometimes that return means leaving people behind. Other times it means staying with them but with a new perspective. The difference isn't on the stage, but in the dancer who has reconciled with their inner music. And so, from the invisible, something new begins to be sown. Without wanting to change the world, one changes one's connection to it. One's entire existence becomes a sacred act. Eating, speaking, laughing, walking, everything becomes a mirror in which the soul is reflected without makeup. But this rebirth isn't heralded by fireworks. It's subtle as dawn. It's the energy that makes people say, "I see you differently," without knowing exactly what has changed. It's the tranquility that transforms conversations, the silence that sustains, the gaze that doesn't judge. One of the greatest treasures the Soul Master left behind was this, that the purpose of awakening is not separation, but service. For those who have looked into their darkness without trembling can now be a beacon for others who are still shipwrecked, not from arrogance, not from doctrine, but from the humility of one who knows the cost of returning home, carrying only the name of their soul. It's enough to be true. It's enough to have made peace with yourself. Because people who have reconciled with their wounds don't go around creating wars. It's those integrated souls who keep the world in balance, who sow tenderness where there was once noise, who embrace chaos without losing their calm. And no, this doesn't mean everything will be easy from here on out. Life will continue to bring waves. Doubts will still appear. Symbols will continue to emerge. Fears will continue to knock at the door. But now you know that this, too, is part of the sacred rhythm of the soul. That growing up isn't walking in a straight line, but dancing with the cycles, the spirals, the inner seasons. Returning to the world isn't about forgetting what you've learned. It's about living it. It's about allowing the wisdom you've acquired to express itself in every daily gesture. And the most beautiful thing of all is that this process never ends. There's no finish line, only constant transformation. An awakened soul never stops dreaming. It only learns to walk with dreams open like windows. In the end, it's not that you come back a different person. You come back, finally, you. I take this moment to tell you that if what you see resonates with you, in the first link in the description, you will find much more material to continue learning. Life as a sacred bridge. There are journeys that don't end when the last words are exchanged, nor when the book that contains them is closed. Some journeys, the most sacred, never end. They only mutate, retreating inward and waiting silently for the soul to dare to reopen them. Because in reality, it was never about learning, but about remembering. This journey wasn't a lesson, it was a mirror. It wasn't a route outward, but a loving descent into the caverns of the spirit. Jung, that alchemist of the psyche, didn't write to teach but to build bridges between the visible and the invisible, between the rational and the sacred, between the mask and the authentic face. His words weren't intended to resolve, but rather to provoke an essential question. What will you do now with what you have seen? Because seeing isn't enough. Understanding isn't enough. Dreaming doesn't save you if you're not willing to walk differently. It's easy to get excited by symbols, archetypes, and profound revelations. But the real challenge begins upon awakening, when you must decide whether you will live as someone who has remembered their essence, or whether you will go back to pretending you didn't see. Wisdom isn't a treasure to be kept. It's a seed that only blossoms when it is incarnated. It's not just an understanding in the mind, but a melody in the blood, a light that seeps into everyday gestures. In how you walk, in how you listen, in how you say no when you were once afraid, in how you say yes without needing permission. Living as a symbol doesn't mean living as an example. It's not about being perfect or brilliant or admired. It's about being true, radically honest. It's about accepting that there is beauty in the shadows, that there is strength in fragility, that there is power in saying, "This is who I am," even when that doesn't fit with what others expect. The soul that has returned to itself no longer seeks to impress. It seeks to serve, not from a position of superiority, but from presence. Not by trying to correct others, but by showing them that it is possible to inhabit oneself with dignity. The being that has merged with its lights and its cracks becomes a home for those who still tremble on the threshold of self-knowledge. Being a symbol isn't a glamorous task. It's, in fact, a sacred trust. Because every time you choose the path of authenticity, you pave an invisible path for someone else. Every time you allow yourself to feel, think, question, cry, or change, you are reminding the world that there is another way to exist. We don't need more figures who speak of love without embodying it. We need human beings who breathe with calm souls, who embrace their contradictions, who walk barefoot through their own labyrinths and return with open hands for others. There are those who believe their lives are unimportant because they are invisible. But the truth is that the world is not sustained by the spotlight, but by small, sincere actions. A word spoken from the heart has more power than 1,000 speeches. A hug given without judgment can save a life. A decision made from the soul can redraw the entire map of your destiny. Therefore, healing is not a private act. Everything you integrate within yourself becomes medicine for the world. And everything you deny within yourself unwittingly becomes a burden for someone else. This is the silent dance of the collective soul. Today the journey changes shape, but it doesn't end. It can't end, because wholeness isn't a state you reach. It's a music you choose to keep listening to. Each night will bring new dreams. Each encounter will awaken dormant archetypes. Each emotion will remain a voice crying out to be heard. And you, who have walked this far, now have a choice: to keep looking inward. Not as one who escapes, but as one who honors. Not from judgment, but from wonder. Listen to what you don't yet understand. Allow sadness to soften your heart. Let confusion teach you not to always have all the answers. Remind yourself that the symbol that matters most is not the one you see outside, but the one that vibrates within. Do you feel anger? Perhaps it's the fire you need to ignite your purpose. Do you feel fear? Perhaps it's the boundary that announces that a part of you is about to be reborn. Do you feel emptiness? Perhaps it's sacred space, ready to be inhabited by a new truth. Don't underestimate your silences. Don't minimize your tears. Don't ignore your creative impulses. Everything that emerges from within you is part of the map. And if you learn to read it, life becomes a meaningful ritual. Jung didn't promise quick answers. He didn't offer prepackaged happiness. He spoke of integrity, of the beauty of being yourself, even when the world screams for you to be something else, of holding your soul in humility and letting it transform how you see, love, and live. Now the circle closes, not because the story ends, but because the symbol has been planted. The seed has been delivered. The rest is up to you. What will you do with this light? What truth will you commit to? What symbol now speaks to you from your heart and asks to be lived? This isn't the end. It's a new beginning, like the river that returns to the sea only to become a cloud, like the night that gives way to dawn only to begin again. Living as a symbol isn't a heroic act. It's a humble act. It's waking up every morning and remembering that what you do matters, that what you heal radiates, that what you honor in yourself gives others permission to honor themselves as well. And then, without realizing it, you become what you always sought. Not an idea, not a theory, not a perfect image, but a living truth, the silent path of inner return. When one encounters the truth within oneself, one is never the same again. Not because one becomes someone different, but because one finally allows oneself to be who one truly is. And this recognition doesn't always come with fireworks, voices from heaven, or a great illumination. Often, the return to oneself happens in the midst of silence, in the everyday, in simple acts that once seemed meaningless. It is there, in the invisible, where the true transformation begins. After awakening, After seeing the symbols, interpreting the dreams, touching the pain, and embracing the shadows, comes the most difficult and most sacred stage, embodying what we've learned. Returning to the world without getting lost in it. Returning to the same streets, the same faces, the same routines, but from a different place. And it is in that return that the true value of the inner journey is revealed. It's not enough to have descended into the depths if, upon returning, we remain slaves to fear, judgment, and the past. It's not enough to understand our wounds if we don't learn to love them as we continue walking. Jung knew this. The soul doesn't ask for theories. It asks for courage. Courage to live from totality, even if no one else understands. Courage to be a symbol in a world that idolizes masks. Being a symbol isn't about being perfect. It's about being faithful. Faithful to the call of the soul. Faithful to what we discover in our most vulnerable moments. Because everything the unconscious showed us, the sadness, the shadow, the crying inner figure, the lost child, the voice we hadn't heard, all of that wasn't an illusion. It was a guide. Now, the question changes. It's no longer, who am I? But how am I going to live from what I now know? Every conversation, every decision, every gesture becomes a small altar where we honor what we've integrated. And it doesn't always show. It may seem like nothing has changed, that you're still working in the same place, greeting the same people, doing the same tasks. But you know, there's an invisible difference that transforms everything. You no longer react the way you used to. You no longer flee from conflict with the same haste. You no longer carry the guilt of others as if it were your cross. Now you listen before you speak. You observe before you judge. You take a breath before you shut down. There's a new music playing inside you, and even if you can't always explain it, you know it's there. It's the music of coherence, the language of someone who has descended to the center of themselves and returned with open hands. The soul that has made this journey becomes medicine, not because it heals others, but because it stops harming. It stops demanding. It stops imposing. It stops repeating patterns. Its mere presence is a balm. It doesn't need to convince anyone. It doesn't need to shout. Because the truth, when lived, makes no noise. It only radiates. Perhaps now you find yourself helping others without intending to. Not through advice, but through listening. Not through reason, but through understanding. And that's the most beautiful thing about the symbol. It's not taught. It's contagious. It's not imposed. It's shared. Sometimes, when you live like this, others approach you with curiosity. They ask you why you look different. They tell you there's something about you they can't explain. And you, perhaps, just smile. Because you know that what's changed isn't your appearance, but your roots. You've planted something new in your heart, and that inevitably blossoms in your eyes. But there will also be moments of doubt. Days when it seems like you've forgotten everything. Days when anger, fear, and sadness invade you again. Don't push them away. Don't think you failed. The soul doesn't unfold in a straight line. Growth is circular. What returns doesn't come to punish you, but to be loved from your new awareness. Remember, every difficult emotion that returns is an opportunity to love more deeply. You're not going back. You're going deeper. And if you stumble in the process, don't judge yourself. Walking with an awakened soul doesn't mean not falling. It means falling, knowing you can rise differently. That every wound has something to say. That every tear connects you with those who also weep in silence. You are not just an individual being. You are a fragment of the world's soul. And the more you know yourself, the more you become a channel for that universal consciousness. You become fertile ground for the invisible. And that, even if you don't see it, is transforming everything around you. Jung said that when a person authentically transforms, their entire community transforms with them. Not because they do something extraordinary, but because by reconciling with themselves, they disrupt a collective pattern. They release an energy. They open a portal. Now you know. The symbol wasn't something outside. The symbol is you. You, when you decide to live with an awakened heart. You, when you choose love over resentment. You, when you dare to express your truth without disguise. That's what this journey has sought to show you. That your life, in its simplest and most sincere form, can be an offering. That every conscious breath can be a prayer. That every honest step can be a ritual. And that even when the world pushes you toward oblivion, you can choose to remember. Remember that you came here to be you. Not a reflection, not an expectation, not a repetition. You came to be presence. And that is the greatest spiritual revolution. So keep listening to your dreams. Keep observing the symbols. Keep honoring your shadow. Not because you have to, but because you no longer know how to live any other way. Because once the soul awakens, there's no turning back. The symbol has taken shape in you. Now you are the one carrying the torch, not to enlighten others, but to keep yourself from getting lost on your own path. Continue, with patience, with tenderness, with humility. There is no destiny more sacred than living in harmony with the soul. And if you ever feel lost again, don't be afraid. Maybe it's just another stage of the journey. Maybe it's your soul, once again, inviting you to look deeper, to love more fully, to live more truly. So, breathe, listen, and take the next step. The silence that knows, inhabiting the truth without words. There comes a time on the path when there is no longer a need to look for external signs, because the compass turns from within. There is no need to ask others what to do, because the soul has become the only voice one desires to obey. Not because it has all the answers, but because it has already learned to dance with the questions. Living as a symbol of wholeness doesn't mean having a flawless life. It means inhabiting it with presence. It means stopping running away from oneself and instead making one's being a sacred dwelling place. It means waking up every day, not with the need to be perfect, but with the desire to be authentic. Someone who has crossed their shadows no longer needs to defend themselves. Those who have made peace with their vulnerability no longer live on the defensive, no longer carry armor, no longer sharpen their voice with arguments. Their strength lies in silence. That silence that doesn't silence, but sustains. A silence that doesn't seek to impose itself, but simply to be. And it is in that being where true alchemy begins to work. There's no longer a need to convince the world of anything. There's no longer a desire to win arguments or be right. Because we understand that every human being is fighting an invisible battle. And that shouting is simply a clumsy way of asking for attention. So, instead of responding to a shout with another shout, we respond with a look, with respect, with the space we give ourselves and can finally offer to others. The person who has become a symbol doesn't need to raise their voice. Their very existence is a prayer. Their journey is a seed. And wherever they go, they leave invisible footprints that others, perhaps unknowingly, will learn to follow. To inhabit wholeness is to become silent medicine. Not a medicine that prescribes solutions, but a medicine that sustains the other's fever without judging it. That accompanies the crying without wanting to dry it out. That listens to the chaos without needing to understand everything. Because when one has descended deep enough into oneself, one understands that pain is not resolved. It is embraced. And that embrace doesn't come from the mind. It's not born of knowledge, but of recognition. From seeing the other and saying, without words, I've been there too. That's the greatest gift offered by someone who has walked toward wholeness. True companionship. A companionship that asks nothing in return. That doesn't seek to stand out. That doesn't need to save anyone. It simply is. And yet, it transforms. Maybe now you're beginning to see that every step, every mistake, every sleepless night, every fall, every unanswered question, everything was leading you here. To this point where, without having arrived anywhere definitive, you find yourself inhabiting yourself, breathing yourself, accepting yourself. That's what life is when lived from totality. Not a destination, but a state of communion. Not a goal, but a way of seeing. And then symbols are no longer just in dreams. They're in a stranger's smile. in the way the sun filters through the window, in the smell of warm bread, in the tear that flows for no apparent reason, in the silence shared with someone who doesn't need explanations. Everything becomes a message. Everything is a mirror. Everything has meaning, even if you can't name it. To live as a symbol is to learn to read the secret language of the universe, not with reason, but with an open soul. And this is where many ask themselves how to sustain this state in a world that seems asleep. The answer isn't to resist, it's to love. Not with the idealized love of fairy tales, but with the everyday love that dares to see. To love is to look at pain without closing in. It's to choose peace even when the ego wants to fight. It's to decide to stay, even when the easy thing to do would be to run away. And if you ever feel disconnected, if routine tries to cloak you in forgetfulness, if the noise of the world drags you into distraction, remember this: nothing is lost. The symbol that lives within you doesn't disappear. It just remains silent, waiting for you to listen again. Because the soul doesn't demand, it waits. It doesn't punish, it understands. It doesn't abandon, it calls. And you will know when it is time to answer that call again. Sometimes it will be through a difficult night. Other times, in the midst of unexpected joy. Other times, it will simply be by looking up at the sky and remembering that you're still here, alive, present. And that is miracle enough. Living from wholeness isn't a single act. It's a practice, a commitment to the invisible, a silent vow you make every morning when you look in the mirror and choose to be yourself again, with the good, the broken, the sacred. Because that is the true power of the symbol. Not that it shines all the time, but that it does not go out when the wind blows. And you, who have come so far to get here, perhaps you know, what the world needs is not more noise, but more truth. Not more speeches, but more presence. Not more goals, but more meaning. And that is your sacred task now. Not as a duty, but as a privilege. To live from your soul, to remind others that they too have one. To be a beacon that doesn't shout, but is always lit. So keep going, without rushing, without pressure. With each step, you continue making progress. With each authentic choice, you continue writing your story. With each act of love, you continue reminding others of what they've forgotten. You don't need titles, or fame, or approval. You just need to listen to yourself. You just need to follow. Because when you live from totality, you no longer walk alone. Life itself walks with you. The invisible bridge between the inner heaven and the earth. You walk on. There is a moment silent and dateless when one stops looking for answers in the sky and begins to live as if they were already written in one's blood. It is not a rational act, nor a moment that can be photographed. It is an inner whisper, a certainty that does not impose itself, but that can no longer be denied. That moment is the birth of the incarnate symbol. Because living from totality doesn't mean becoming a monument, but a bridge between what you were and what you are becoming, between the visible and the invisible, between the reason that organizes and the mystery that pushes from deep within. When you have seen your shadow and not rejected it, when you have recognized the child that still lives within you, when you have listened to your inner voice without fear, then you are no longer just someone who walks. You are someone who reveals, who remembers, who connects. And that connection doesn't need explaining. Those who live from the soul don't argue. They embody. They don't preach. They inspire. They don't demand. They invite. Life suddenly is no longer a series of tasks to be completed. It becomes a ceremony. From how you get dressed in the morning to how you say grace after the meal. From how you say good morning to how you close the door at the end of the day. Everything is a symbol. Everything is an expression of what you carry within. Not because you are looking to be special, but because you've understood that every gesture, every word, every choice builds or destroys bridges. And you can no longer walk the world as if you didn't know that. Then you become slower, more conscious, more selective with your thoughts, more delicate with your silences. Because you've seen how a misspoken word can hurt as much as a stone, and how an authentic gesture can change someone's life without you even knowing it. That's where the symbol becomes living action. It's no longer a drawing in your journal, nor an image in a dream. Now you carry it in the way you listen to those who suffer, in the way you hold their gaze without judgment, in the strength with which you say no when saying yes would mean betraying yourself. Because living as a symbol of wholeness also involves renunciation, not of others, but of your masks, of your old survival strategies, of the versions of yourself that were born out of fear, not because you hate them, but because you no longer need them. You no longer need to pretend. You no longer need to fit in. You no longer need to chase after what doesn't resonate. And then you discover a new power, the power of stillness. The world may be screaming, but you don't get upset. The world may be running, but you decide to sit down. The world may be pushing, but you listen. Because you've understood that urgency is often the enemy of truth. That the soul doesn't obey clocks or external goals. It only unfolds when you give it space. And you give it to Him. You give space in the way you breathe before you answer. In how you speak your truth without violence. In how you accept not having all the answers, but still trust the path. In how you cry when you need to, without shame. In how you laugh, not because everything is okay, but because you've learned to embrace even what you don't understand. To live as a symbol of wholeness is to live knowing that you are in service to something greater than yourself. Not as a sacrifice, but as a meaning. The baker who bakes his bread as if it were an offering. The mother who cares as if every caress wove destiny. The friend who listens as if every word were sacred. The stranger who smiles and, unknowingly, reminds you that beauty still exists. They all live as symbols. Maybe they have never read a philosophy book. Maybe they don't know how to name what they feel. But they live it. They embody it. They give it to the world. And you can do it too. Your symbol doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be true. Maybe you're the symbol of resilience, or of love that blossoms even after abandonment. Maybe you're the symbol of the silence that holds wisdom, or of the voice that never gives up. Maybe you're the symbol of the fire that burns without burning, or of the river that never stops. Whatever your symbol, only you can live it. And to live it is to remember, every day, that you are made of more than flesh and blood, that you are the incarnate word, that you are history woven by mystery, that you are a bridge between wound and healing. That's your gift to the world. You don't need to embellish it, you just need to give it. Not as an obligation, but as a response to the life that has given you so much. And so one day, with no date set, someone will cross paths with you, and they won't know why, but they'll feel hope. They'll feel truth. They'll feel that there's something in you that resonates with something in them. And in that moment, without you having to say it, the symbol will live. Because totality is not taught, it is transmitted. And you, who have come this far, are now ready to be that channel. When the world trembles, sustaining the symbol in the midst of chaos. No one talks about this when they begin the journey towards self. That after waking up, the world remains the same. The news still brings pain. Relationships don't always improve. The body still aches, and the days still have storms. The soul has changed, yes, but life doesn't always adjust to the new you. It is there, right at that intersection between the transformed internal and the immovable external, where the true practice begins. Holding your symbol when no one else sees it, when everything around seems to want to make it disappear. Because it's not enough to have touched the light on a retreat or to have cried in front of a mirror, finally honest. What counts is whether you can remember that light when you're tired, when someone hurts you, when you feel like a forgotten child in a world that moves too fast. Symbolic life isn't a moment of glory. It's a silent commitment, like a candle you choose to keep lit, even when the wind blows hard. And holding that symbol you discovered inside yourself, is not easy. Sometimes you'll feel ridiculous, as if you're the only one who still believes in the invisible. You'll judge yourself for not being stronger, for still feeling fear or sadness, as if that's a sign of regression. But it isn't. Experiencing pain again isn't failing along the path. It's part of the process, because now you are not the same as before awakening. Now you know your shadow. You have looked your fears in the eye. And even if they return, they no longer come alone. Now you are there too, with presence, with love, with the deep memory of the soul that you are. Before, when you suffered, you lost yourself. Now, when you suffer, you find yourself. And that's the difference. Chaos doesn't disappear, but your relationship with it transforms. You no longer relinquish control. You no longer run. You observe. You name. You hold. Maybe even embrace it. Because you've learned that behind every crisis is a symbol waiting to be recognized. Maybe the anger you feel isn't just rage. Maybe it's your inner fire reminding you that you've been silent for too long again. Maybe your sadness isn't just discouragement. Maybe it's your soul telling you that you've stopped nourishing yourself. Maybe that emptiness that returns every night isn't loneliness, but space. Sacred space for what has yet to arrive. To live as a symbol in chaos is to have the courage not to lose your poetry when everything screams for prose. It is to choose, again and again, to respond truthfully, even when lying seems easier. It is to hold your gaze when you'd rather lower your eyes. It is to trust the secret language of your soul, even when no one else understands it. And that's tiring. Of course it's tiring, but it's a noble tiredness. The tiredness of someone who loves with their whole body, of someone who lives with their whole soul, of someone who hasn't given up, despite the pain, despite the uncertainty, despite the dark nights. In those moments, don't judge yourself. Remember, even the sun sets, even the sea recedes before kissing the shore again. You too can rest. You too can tremble without it meaning you're broken. Holding your symbol in the midst of chaos doesn't mean perfection. It means honesty. There are days when the only way to live from the soul is to accept that you can't take it anymore and ask for help, or cry, or say, I don't know, or let yourself be hugged. And that is also living as a symbol. Because the most powerful symbol isn't the cross, nor the fire, nor the moon. It's vulnerability transformed into truth. When you decide not to betray yourself in the midst of fear. When you choose to listen to your heart even when logic screams at you. When, even in the darkness, you keep walking without extinguishing your inner light. In those moments, you are the symbol, not the one you read, not the one you study, the one you embody. The symbol that reminds the world that you can still believe, that you can live with soul, that there is another way. And in those gestures, in that quiet courage, an invisible network spreads, a network made of authentic humanity. Because when you hold your symbol, even if you don't know it, you help others find theirs. That is the deepest revolution, a silent community of human beings who, in the midst of chaos, have not forgotten who they are. Don't expect recognition. Don't seek applause. This isn't a feat for the eyes of the world. It's an intimate promise with your soul. Promise yourself that you will keep walking even if you fall again. Promise you that you will rise without hatred, without harshness. Promise yourself that you will continue listening to your dreams even if you don't understand them. Promise yourself that you will continue to look at others with compassion even if the world teaches you otherwise. Promise yourself that you will live from the symbol even if you feel alone sometimes. Because you are not alone. There are other hearts, far and near, that also tremble, that also struggle to hold light in the midst of the storm. You may not see them, you may never speak to them, but they exist, and their existence strengthens yours. And when this is all over, when the chaos calms down and your soul breathes again, you'll know you didn't just survive. You will know that you lived true to yourself. And that is the most sacred symbol you can offer to the world. The art of loving from integrity, creating and connecting with the awakened soul. When a person encounters their soul, something in their way of loving changes forever. Love is no longer based on a place of lack, a need to be saved, or a fear of being alone. Now, love is grounded and heartfelt, with a fire that doesn't burn, but rather illuminates. Before awakening, many loves were unconscious pacts. Feel what I lack. Make me forget what hurts. Tell me I'm enough because I don't believe it. But after the soul's journey, those contracts dissolve. Not because love ceases to matter, but because it is purified. It ceases to be a transaction and becomes an offering. It's no longer about possessing, it's about sharing. Silence is no longer feared, it is honored. It is no longer required, it is recognized. The person who has crossed their shadow, who has dialogued with their dreams, who has seen the multiplicity of their being, begins to look at others with greater compassion. They understand that every human being is a constellation of wounds, memories, masks, and dormant symbols. Perfection is no longer demanded. Humanity is embraced. And from there, a new love is born. A love that is not built only in sublime moments, but in everyday gestures, in the silent respect for the other's space, in the ability to listen even when one disagrees, in the tenderness of letting someone be as they are, without trying to mold them. This love isn't fragile, but it's not violent either. It's a firm love that knows how to say no without hurting. It knows how to retreat when there's no more growth. It knows how to stay when the soul demands it. It doesn't depend on social contracts or labels. It's a bond of soul to soul, not mask to mask. And since the soul does not impose itself, neither does this love. The same goes for creativity. Before, perhaps one created to gain approval, fame, or success. After awakening, one creates because it becomes inevitable. The soul needs to express itself, and it does so through words, painting, dance, cooking, gardening. The medium doesn't matter. What matters is the intention. Creating becomes a sacred act. It is not created to demonstrate, it is created to liberate. It is not created to impress, it is created to honor the life that flows within. In this state, even the simplest actions become art. Mindfully preparing a cup of tea, writing a few lines at dawn, planting a seed in fertile soil. Everything becomes filled with symbolism. Everything can become a silent prayer. Living from the symbol means allowing beauty not to be an exception, but a way of being in the world. And that beauty is contagious. It inspires, it awakens, because it's not about making pretty things, but true things. And when a human being commits to the inner truth, the entire universe responds. It attracts what resonates with it. It inspires those ready to remember their own light. It becomes a point of balance for those who are still lost. Communities are transformed when there are those who dare to live this way. Charismatic leaders and saviors are no longer needed. All that's needed is the presence of authentic people who don't shy away from pain, who don't hide their doubts, but who walk with dignity because they know their roots. In these communities, there's no competition, there's cooperation, no judging, just embracing. Perfection is not required. The process is honored. The awakened soul knows that it has not come to save the world, but to be consistent with its truth. And in that consistency, its very existence becomes medicine. Few things are more transformative than looking at someone who has walked through their shadow and still loves, who has known the abyss and still smiles, who has lost and still trusts, who has fallen 1,000 times and keeps walking, not because it doesn't hurt, but because they know the soul never dies. That presence needs no words. It is a living symbol, and seeing it, others remember that they can be one too. Therefore, after awakening, one no longer lives to be right, to be the wisest, or to win arguments. One lives to silently sow symbols, to be a bridge, to remember with one's life that one can live with an open heart, even in a world that sometimes seems closed. And it's not that the pain disappears. The sensitive soul continues to feel, but it has learned to translate every emotion, every obstacle, every wound into the language of the soul. When something hurts, you don't ask, "Why me?" You ask, "What part of me needs love right now?" When something fails, he doesn't blame himself. He asks himself, which symbol is dying and which one wants to be born? When something breaks, he doesn't despair. He asks himself, what truth was hidden beneath this? And so, Even suffering becomes a lesson. Even loss becomes a revelation. Even emptiness is filled with meaning, because everything, absolutely everything, can be a symbol. The awakened soul lives in that mystery. He doesn't need clear answers. He doesn't seek guarantees. Just presence, just connection, just a deep coherence between what he feels, what he believes, and what he does. And that coherence is its beacon. It guides her when everything outside falls apart. It holds her when her body trembles. It roots her when the wind tries to uproot her. Life becomes sacred, not because everything goes well, but because every moment, even the darkest, is lived with soul. And so love ceases to be a fairy tale and becomes communion. Creativity ceases to be talent and becomes a channel. The community ceases to be a group and becomes a reflection. And the person, you, me, anyone who chooses to live from their center, unwittingly becomes a symbol of integrity for a world that has forgotten its unity. That's the gift of the path. Not perfection, not fame, not applause, but the possibility of being a mirror of something real, something eternal, something that breathes from the depths of the soul. The echo of the soul, when the symbol transcends life, when the soul has traveled all its corridors, the shadow, the wound, the longing, the fall, the integration, it reaches not a goal, but a revelation, that it is not just a spark in the midst of the universe, but an inseparable part of the eternal fire. And then something happens that no philosophy can fully explain, something that can only be felt deep within the heart. The symbol that has been awakened within you does not die with you. There are those who live in fear of the end, as if death were a thief who will rob them of what they have been. But those who have made the journey toward wholeness know that this is only an illusion. What has been truly understood, what has been embodied in every gesture, every word, every silence, that does not disappear. It remains in the invisible fabric of life. Like seeds that we don't know who planted, and yet they bear fruit. Like ancient songs that are repeated without anyone remembering their origin. Like the scent of the earth after the rain. Familiar, eternal, ownerless. That is the soul, when it has remembered its true name. Carl Jung didn't ask us to become gods or isolated sages. His teaching was more humble, more radical. Be yourself with such depth that others will dare to be yourself too. Make peace with your demons. Listen to your dreams. Honor your sadness. And let it all speak through you. Because deep down, we are not isolated individuals. We are symbols that intersect, archetypes that walk, echoes that respond. And when one of us becomes aware of his inner symbol, something in the whole world breathes differently. The mother who reconciles with her history heals generations. The young person who embraces his sensitivity opens a new space in his culture. The old woman who dances, despite the pain, teaches that beauty has no age. None of that is lost. None of that dies. Even if the body shuts down, the vibration remains. Because the soul isn't something we have. It's what we are. And to live symbolically is to let that soul manifest itself without obstacles. Therefore, the end of the journey is not the last breath, but the silent decision to surrender to the mystery. To trust that what we experience had meaning, even when we didn't understand everything. To know that the symbol we embody will live on in the eyes of those we touch, in the places where we leave our mark, in the words we speak with truth. And here's a secret. There is no small symbol. A hug given from the soul can change someone's story. A compassionate look can save a life without you even knowing it. A poem written in the early morning can accompany someone you'll never meet. This is how the soul acts. In the invisible, in the subtle, in the eternal. That's why it doesn't matter if no one applauds you, if no one fully understands your path. Consistency with your symbol is more important than any recognition. What you do from the heart always finds its place, even if you don't see it. And when the time comes to let go of the body, you'll know. It won't be a fall. It will be an expansion, like the wave that returns to the sea, like the sigh that returns to the wind. Then you will see yourself not as a story, with a beginning and an end, but as a living stream that continues to flow in other forms, in other times, in other hearts. And if you did the work of looking inward, if you are faithful to your symbols, if you gave shape to your truth, then there will be no fear, only a sweet nostalgia and profound gratitude. Because you will have truly lived, you will have loved without masks, you will have created without shame, you will have cried without fear, and you will have remembered that nothing, absolutely nothing, is lost when it is born from the soul. Then you will no longer need to repeat the cycle. You will no longer seek approval. You will no longer chase promises. You will simply be. You will be. Like the tree that gives shade without expecting anything. Like the river that flows without knowing where it is going. Like the star that shines because that is what it is meant to do. Your existence will have been a living symbol of the sacred. Not for being perfect, but for being authentic. Not to avoid the darkness, but to embrace it. And others, perhaps many, perhaps just one, will remember that they can do it too. That will be your legacy, not your accomplishments, not your titles, not your possessions, but the peace you sowed, the tenderness you shared, the permission you gave through your example for others to awaken as well. That's why even at the end, Jung wasn't speaking of death. He was speaking of total integration, of a return to the center, of a conscious surrender to the greatest symbol of all, the universal soul. And just as a circle never ends, so too does this journey transform. No longer a search, but now a seed that falls into the heart of the reader, of the friend, of the stranger who crosses your path. And in that heart, another story begins, another dance, another symbol, one that perhaps you won't even know you inspired, but that will undoubtedly carry your light. So what's left now? It remains to live. Walk with your soul awake. Listen to dreams. Honor the silences. Be a symbol of what you have discovered, without needing to explain it. Because in a world where so many have forgotten who they are, the simple presence of someone who has remembered can change everything. Thank you for walking this path. I hope you enjoyed this journey as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. If you want to take this to the next level, don't forget to check out the first link in the description. You'll find more content, exercises, and tools that can transform your journey. I'll be waiting for you inside.